So wet my bulb, please.
What? I'm leaving that one alone. I'm leaving you and your bulbs alone.
The WBGT.
BGT, wet bulb globe temperature.
WBGT community.
That's right.
Which you're both
WBGT
proud
plus
members of the
community.
WBG.
I've never used the WBGT before.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe you need to just check your privilege and
That's right.
become a better ally to the wet bulb community.
My name's Sarah Perkins Kirkpatrick, and I'm a Professor of Climate Science at the Australian National University in Canberra.
I'm Ian Strachan, a former journalist turned science communicator. We're members of the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Weather of the 21st Century.
And this is Totally Cooked, the Climate and Weather podcast. Today's guest is Ollie Jay, Professor of Heat and Health at the University of Sydney. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming to the University of Sydney.
Thank you for having us. Takes an opportune sip of tea.
Yeah.
As introduced.
And now...
I feel like I'm at a particular disadvantage today because I'm outnumbered by heat experts. Sarah's got us covered from a climate angle, and Ollie knows all about the impacts of heat on the human body.
That's right. I guess.
Yes.
We're not all about it, but...
Yes, next.
So my opening question for you both is, what is extreme heat?
Over to you.
Well, why don't we start with Sarah?
Okay.
Because I like the way we want to think about this is that you got hot weather and you got hot people, and that's what influences...
Guilty.
That's what influences health, right? Being the hot person in the hot environment. So the best way to think about this is through this cascade of effects. First of all, you have the hot weather, which is Sarah's expertise.
So it's just basically, when we think about heat in terms of hot weather, it's basically when the temperature is really hot for the local climate. All right, so what is hot in Sydney is hotter than what would be hot for Melbourne, for example, which is cooler than what would be hot in Darwin. So it's just got to be really extreme for that location. And that can be measured often by what we call percentiles. So if it's in the top 5% of days or the top 1% of days, then it might be considered a hot day. And there's different physical mechanisms that allow hot weather to form, which we won't go into today. But it's just basically when the temperature is extreme on the hot side for that location.
So when it comes to the person... of course, temperature's a really important characteristic, but it's not just temperature that defines the human heat stress risk. Temperature is measured in the shade. That's the first thing that everyone should keep in mind. So if you're out in direct solar radiation, out in the middle of the day, especially in a hot summer day, the mean radiant temperature that you'll be exposed to, which takes into account the additional heat that comes directly from the sun or bouncing off other structures around you like the floor or walls, that's going to be as much as 20 degrees Celsius higher than air temperature in the shade. So you need to not just think about air temperature, you need to think about mean radiant temperature. There's also humidity as well, because the only way in which humans can physiologically keep cool when it's 35 degrees Celsius or hotter is by producing sweat and getting that sweat to evaporate from the skin. And the characteristic of the environment that determines the ability of that sweat to evaporate is humidity. And that's then also modified by wind speed. So now you've got 4 environmental characteristics that define how hot is too hot: temperature, humidity, mean radiant temperature, and wind. And then it also depends on what the person's doing and what they're wearing, because that also determines someone's risk for a given set of conditions. So if I'm physically active, I'm generating a lot of heat inside the body, and I've got to get rid of that heat to stop it accumulating inside the body and causing my body to overheat. And also my clothing can serve as a barrier to heat transfer via evaporation or via conduction.
We kind of touched on that. I remember we had an episode where we talked about social norms and clothing, especially,
It's a really
male social norms, you know.
Well, especially the way in which that feeds into the prevalence of things like air conditioning.
Yeah.
So you've got you've got parts of the world where they've got these big high-rise buildings and you've got everybody wearing suits.
Yes.
Which kind of probably came from England or something, culturally.
You British.
Sorry, everyone.
Here we go again.
Yep.
And yet they've been worn in kind of tropical countries.
Yeah.
So in order to keep people comfortable, you've got the prevalence of air conditioning, and it's all kind of anchored in these normal behaviors, such as wearing way too much clothing, which have become socially acceptable in certain environments. But that's another story for another day, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm hitting. Yep.
I just realised I didn't record. No, it's all right. No, that's all my problem.
I was going to say, for both of your answers, from the climate and meteorology perspective and from the human perspective, it's the classic science answer, which is it depends.
Yes, it
really does depend. Yeah. And I could go a step further if you like. So you've got those 4 things that define how hot's too hot in the environment. Then you've got those 2 personal parameters, what you're doing, what you're wearing. But even for a fixed set of those 6 things, it's different between the 4 of us that are in this room. And it's modified by things like how big I am, how fit I might be.
How old?
How old I might be. If I'm taking certain types of medication, if I have a chronic disease, such as heart disease or kidney disease. Yeah, physiologists can kind of serve as an interpreter. They're interpreting what the climate means in terms of what it's going to do to the body, and then subsequently what the health risk is going to be. And that's a lot of the work that we're kind of focusing on right now.
Great. I have a question to hopefully help the audience understand some of what we're talking about. What is the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke?
Great. I'm really glad you asked for that question.
Yes.
Because, there's a lot of conventional wisdom kind of floating about,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it gets muddled up. Really, heat exhaustion and heat stroke are part of the same continuum. They're on a spectrum of heat illnesses, and the underlying pathophysiology is similar. It's just one is a more severe cousin of the other. I can regulate my body temperature typically around about 37 degrees Celsius. And if I'm exposed to a hot environment or a heat stress environment, and or I'm wearing excess clothes or I'm physically active, my core temperature will start going up. And then my body tries to fight to stop that core temperature going up any further. It's called thermoregulation. So I start sweating, I redistribute my blood in different ways around the body. And then what will happen is that we can safely tolerate rises in core temperature pretty much without any problems up to around about 39 degrees Celsius. So about a 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius increase in core temperature. But then once we go beyond that kind of threshold, and it's mixed up with a few other things, but you might start getting symptoms. There's an increased risk of getting symptoms like nausea, dizziness, vomiting, and that's called heat exhaustion. It's not life-threatening, but it's quite unpleasant, and it can really impact people's well-being during day-to-day activities. It's really kind of a problem in the workplace as well, in hot environments. But it doesn't cause irreversible damage. You try to take measures to try to cool the person down. You get them to stop what they're doing. They reduce how much clothing they're wearing. You introduce different cooling strategies to try to reduce their body temperature. But in some cases, that's not possible. We see this in the military quite a lot, actually. And so if the heat stress is maintained and the person can't stop what they're doing, then the heat strain, so how hot the body's getting, will get higher and higher and higher. And eventually your core temperature might breach a threshold of, let's say, 40 degrees Celsius or 40.5 degrees Celsius. At this point, we've now got an increased risk of heat stroke. And heat stroke is a medical emergency, and it can be deadly. So I'll just quickly describe to you what actually happens inside the body when you get heat stroke. So
strap yourself in.
Yeah, strap yourself in. Yeah, it's not very pleasant. So
I better get some water for this.
Yeah. So what we're doing is that we're redistributing all this blood away from the body core towards the skin surface. And what this means is that you only got so much blood inside the body. And so the delivery of oxygen to the endothelial tissues of your gut, so the lining of your gut, the oxygen delivery is reduced because you don't have as much blood flow because it's going elsewhere to try to keep you cool. And when that happens, when you have low oxygen delivery to the gut and you've got high body temperatures, this causes the gap junctions of your endothelial tissues to start becoming looser. And so endotoxins, or poo bacteria, as my old PhD student Nate Morris used to refer to it as, can start actually translocate, start leaking out of the gut. And it leaks out of the gut and it can enter the bloodstream. Then when it enters the bloodstream, it starts circulating around the body, and then it sets off this cascade of effects, this systemic inflammatory response, multiple blood clotting around the body, multiple organ failure, and death. So that's what heat stroke is in its very severe form, and it's deadly and it's irreversible.
What you mentioned there about the poo bacteria kind of exiting the gut and entering the bloodstream, is that the first kind of most serious effect that triggers that cycle of self-destruction, or like is it always that, or is that just one of the nastiest?
Yeah, it's a combination of that and the direct effect of heat on the cells.
Okay.
So eventually you'll start getting rupturing of cell membranes because of a direct heat impacts on those cells. And we can build up some resilience to this. So if you're heat acclimatized, if you're very fit, then we build up a greater number of these things called chaperone cells, such as heat shock proteins that help protect cells from direct heat-related impacts. So there is some modification that we can acquire biologically to reduce the risk of these things happening. But at the end of the day, when it's too hot, it doesn't matter who you are, it can result in these really, really negative outcomes.
How do you become heat acclimatized safely?
Well, before I tell you how we become heat acclimatized safely, should I quickly go through what it is?
Please.
So acclimatization means that you're adapting to the natural environment. So in the case of heat, we're adapting to the hot heat stress environment. You also have altitude acclimatization, which means you adapt to a low oxygen hypobaric environment. But we're talking about heat in this particular case. And so there's two primary ways in which we can do so. We can adapt behaviorally, so we can become better at understanding the strategies that we can adopt to try to reduce the heat stress on the body to then minimize the heat strain. But then there's the biological adaptations that take place as well. So in order to induce this full suite of heat adaptation responses, we'll do it in the climate chamber, for example. And I just tell you this to give you an idea of how big the hammer is that you have to hit a person with, not literally, of course, in order to induce these adaptations. So we'll expose people in the chamber to at least 7 consecutive days of at least an hour and a half to 2 hours of exposure to extreme temperature and humidity, plus with moderate to vigorous exercise. And so you have to do that for 7 consecutive days to get a good development of these adaptations. So the adaptations that we see physiologically is that your core temperature at rest starts a little lower. So it reduces by about 0.3 or 0.4 degrees Celsius. Doesn't sound like very much. What it does, it gives you a little bit of extra headroom before you get to those critical thresholds that cause heat stroke and heat exhaustion. So that's one thing. We have an expansion of our blood volume. So we have, it means basically you have more blood inside the body, which means it's easier to maintain blood pressure when you're exposed to the heat. So you've got this redistribution of blood to the skin. It means there's more left over to maintain blood pressure. So that reduces how much work the heart has to do when you're exposed to the heat. We become better at sweating. So we'll have a higher maximum sweat rate, which means that you have this greater ceiling for evaporative heat loss, which is really important. So those are the 3 main things that serve just really well. And you kind of see how it modifies how hot people get. It's pretty extraordinary. So you might get somebody to do exactly the same thing in the same environment, and their core temperature might go up by 2 degrees Celsius. Then 7 days later, their core temperature will go up by 1 degree Celsius.
Wow.
So just in that short time.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The cardiovascular strain, their heart rate might go to 180 beats per minute, doing the same thing on day 1, and day 7, it'll go up to 140 beats per minute.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing adaptation.
This is like, I struggle with this internally because I love hearing about this work. This is not the first time I've heard talking about these acclimatizations. And I often part of me is really curious. Like I want to give this a go just to see what it's like. But also at the same time, 7 days, 2 hours in these conditions, working out. Sounds like torture.
Well, I mean, it depends who you are, I suppose. Every time I talk about this stuff, Sarah always looks visibly appalled by all.
No. It's this internal battle I'm having. Maybe I should give that a go. Why would you do?
I mean, if you think about it, so in terms of, if you go for a run, your core temperature is going to go up when you go for a run, right? If you go for a run on a hot day, then your core temperature is going to go up then as well, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously it's more severe than that.
Yeah, true. That's very true.
But, it's not as though we're often not necessarily doing all that much that people won't be exposed to in the real world.
Yeah.
So we're doing quite a lot of work right now. For example, we've got this Wellcome Trust funded project looking at heat stress during pregnancy. And so, a lot of people would say, well, how do you get ethics to do something like that, where we take pregnant women and expose them to these heat stress environments in our chamber?
You monsters.
Yeah. But the reality is that we're not really exposing them to anything that they wouldn't be exposed to on a hot day. Yet there's all sorts of very clear conservative safety criteria that are overlaying that. We're monitoring all these vital signs. So you could argue that they're probably safer in our chamber than they are outside on a hot day.
I almost did one of your experiments when I was pregnant with my second kid.
That's
I remember that. But it was
that,
my doctor was worried about my asthma becoming a problem.
Yeah.
Got a note from the doctor.
Almost. I was like, I'm going to do this experiment. She's like, you can, but I'd advise you not to. But
Possibly off topic or a tangent, but could what you've just described be used to make yourself fitter for athletic competition, or it's kind of like pre-season training? Yeah,
so that's been looked at by a lot of sports scientists. So, I mean, the best advantage that you get is if you're going to compete in a hot environment, then becoming heat acclimated in a chamber or heat acclimatized to the natural environment beforehand is going to be absolutely essential for your competitiveness in that environment. Your performance would fall off a cliff otherwise.
Yep. Do athletes do that if they're going
a lot of athletes. I mean, all serious athletes have to do that.
Right.
Yeah. So, for example, this past few weeks, the FIFA Club World Cup soccer has been taking place in the United States. It's been very hot and very humid. And those teams would have gone over at least a week, maybe a couple of weeks beforehand to adapt to the environment. If they didn't go directly there, they would have gone to somewhere similar in order to induce those adaptations.
And what about, I'm thinking now of, say, teams that go to warm weather training mid-season. Do they come back to a cold environment and get commensurate benefits, or does it not work that way?
Yeah, no, it doesn't quite work that way. So if you think about those adaptations that you get in the hot environment, they benefit you in that hot environment. So if you come back to the cold environment, then the demand for blood flow to go to the skin is not as much because you're not getting hot. And therefore, the benefit that you get from that extra adaptation doesn't really provide you with any added advantage.
Okay.
So you shouldn't go and train in like the United Arab Emirates just to play a better soccer game in England.
Seemingly not. That's pretty much what I was saying. Yeah.
I think a lot of teams do that in January when they have kind of a break. But I think that's just simply
because it's nice
for the mind, right?
Yeah.
If you live in Manchester, then you probably want to go to somewhere warm in January.
At any time of the year.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, you've touched on this already, but for our audience, can you, and for me, who doesn't know as much about this as you two, or indeed anything relative to you two, what are the big differences between heat and humidity when it comes to the impacts of these temperatures and these conditions on the human body?
Yeah, so the best way to think about it is the way in which the environmental conditions impact heat transfer. So it sounds a bit boring because we're talking about physics and all the rest of it, but the only reason I would store excess heat inside the body and my body temperature would go up is because I have an imbalance between the amount of heat I'm generating inside the body from my physical activity, so from whatever I'm doing, and the amount of heat that I can dissipate from the skin surface to the surrounding environment. So if we break down the way in which we exchange heat between the skin or the body and the environment, there's two primary pathways. One is sensible heat transfer, which is a combination of convection, conduction, and radiation. And they're driven by temperature differences between the skin surface and whatever characteristic of the environment is relevant for that heat transfer pathway. So for convection, it's the air temperature in the shade, and that's also then multiplied by the air velocity. For radiation, it's the mean radiant temperature in the environment relative to the skin. So the reason that those characteristics really matter is because it determines the driving force for sensible heat transfer via convection and radiation between the body and the environment. Now, often if air temperature is 35 degrees Celsius, that's approximately equal to what my skin temperature is. So you have no temperature gradient, therefore you have no heat transfer via convection, because it doesn't matter how windy it is, you're multiplying a number by zero, the result's going to be zero. But once air temperature exceeds skin temperature, that's when you've actually got a flipping of that temperature gradient. And now not only are you generating heat inside the body, you're getting extra heat from the environment. Likewise, if you've got a high mean radiant temperature, because it's a hot sunny day, then you're going to have a negative temperature gradient between mean radiant temperature and the body, and you're gaining extra heat via radiation. So that's why on very hot days, you've got to get rid of a lot of heat in order to maintain what we call heat balance, to regulate body temperature. The only way in which we can do that is by sweating. Now, it's not the production of sweat that cools you down, it's the evaporation of sweat. And it's humidity that defines the driving force for evaporation of that sweat from the skin surface to the environment.
Sensible heat transfer implies the existence of insensible or silly heat transfer.
Yeah. So
it's a funny term.
I think it's a pretty old school term.
It is.
Yeah.
Where does that derive from? Like what? I mean,
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, you're the physicist. There you go.
No, I'm not. I know. This is
It might even be Latin, right?
Well, it's like so when we talk about how extreme heat develops climatologically, it's, I always say it's a partitioning of the sensible and latent heat fluxes at the surface, at the ground surface. And it's, sensible basically, how I've explained it is like dry.
Yep.
It's a temperature, whereas latent covers the moisture, right? So,
that's exactly the same with the body, right?
Exactly.
So the other terms that we've used is sensible and latent heat transfer, or evaporative heat transfer. So to make it simple, I usually say dry and evaporative.
Right.
Just so this is kind of clear.
If I'm going for a jog in the summer and I'm sweating a lot, I'm going to pull funny faces and make weird noises and do like unsensible heat transfer.
Okay, that was a really bad joke.
Tortured.
Just go jogging in the morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't plan to do jogging at all.
There's a reason to do that, right? Because if you think about the way, it's not just temperature, right? So the ambient temperature will be cooler, but the sun will be at a lower angle, so the mean radiant temperature will be lower.
Didn't think of that. That makes sense.
Yep. And so those are two things that are quite important, right? If you think about it. And when it comes to evaporation, so the humidity determines the drive for evaporation from the skin to the environment. So what starts happening when it's really humid is that you're sweating a lot, but you see a lot of that sweat on the skin, or it's dripping off the body, but it's not cooling you. And you need that sweat to evaporate from your body in order to cool you down. And so what we observe when we have high humidity is that we have a reduction in something we call sweating efficiency, which is simply the proportion of sweat that you produce that actually evaporates.
So if you think of like a wine glass or a cocktail glass or even a water glass in a high humidity environment, you have all of that condensation round down the side. Yeah. It's the same sort of idea that it can't evaporate. There's no space in the air for it to be sucked up because there's just so much moisture already in the air.
I've got an image in my head now of like peak era Rafael Nadal. Australian Open.
Yep.
Just like sweat.
That's
close,
right.
you know,
Every year I used
he's-
to get asked about that.
He's bouncing the ball before a serve, right?
Yeah.
And the camera's close up, and there's like bead of sweat runs down the nose. He wipes it off with his sweatband. Immediately, another one follows.
I reckon it's all that hair he had, but I'm just being jealous. Well, he's actually losing it on top, wasn't he, by the end?
Yeah, I think, Rafa needs to go to Turkey and get cheeky little hair transplant.
Are they cheaper?
I'm not one to talk
Cheaper
about
in
that.
Turkey, yep. So tennis, this is
Yes.
a forced segue. I want to
very
talk
good.
about wet bulb temperature, which I think some of our listeners may have heard of before, but I would like
Sure.
to find out what that means.
It's certainly, you can explain it, Ollie. I'm not going to do this. But no, it's certainly become more prevalent, I've noticed, in more mainstream media in the last few years. Wet bulb.
Definitely. Like last 3 or 4 years, people have just cottoned on to this idea of wet bulb temperature, haven't
Yeah. Whether or not people completely understand what it
They-
means
I don't.
is another,
they? No, I don't
So
think
wet my bulb, please. What?
I'm leaving that one alone. I'm leaving you and your bulbs alone.
Yeah, what is it? What does it mean?
Okay. So, what is wet bulb? So, it is a imperfect measure of the combined effect of a high temperature and the humidity. So, the reason that wet bulb temperature it's nice that people have started talking about that because at least it starts forcing people to start considering something other than just temperature.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually starting to think about humidity, which is really important for humans because we sweat and that sweat's got to evaporate and the humidity determines the potential for that. In a practical sense, a wet bulb temperature is if you take a thermometer and you've got the bulb at the bottom, which is sensing the temperature, and then the liquid, if it's alcohol or mercury in the old school days, expands, and then you measure the temperature that way on a calibrated scale. If you were to think then to take that same thermometer and you were to wrap a wet cloth around the base of that bulb or around that bulb, and depending on how much moisture is in the air, that moisture is going to evaporate at different rates. And because it's evaporating, it's extracting latent heat energy from that system, and then it will cool that thermometer down. And so the temperature at which it reaches a steady state, which is based on the ambient environment and the temperature and the humidity, that's your wet bulb temperature. There are 2 types of wet bulb temperature. There's something called psychometric wet bulb temperature.
I did not know that.
And then natural wet bulb temperature.
Here we go.
This is
Here we
new.
go.
Yep.
Okay, so
Listening
leans
now.
in.
Yep.
Yeah. Lean in.
I feel like I should know
So
this.
psychometric wet bulb temperature is where that's really a more pure measure of humidity in the environment. What it does is that you're forcing air across that wet bulb in order to get that steady state. So then you get that steady state wet bulb temperature. Natural wet bulb temperature is where you take that system, the same device, and you just leave it out in the sun, and it's exposed to radiation, which adds a bit of extra heat to the system. And it's also exposed to natural airflow as well. So if it's still, your wet bulb temperature will be higher than if it's windy. And so that natural wet bulb temperature is actually a nice, simple measure of the cooling capacity of a given environment.
Yes,
Again, it's not perfect, but it's not bad. And so then there's something called WBGT, wet bulb globe temperature.
Welcome acronyms.
Yeah. And so people get all mixed up about this stuff
Yeah.
as well. And then people say the wet globe bulb temperature, which makes no sense. So
The WBGT
BGT, wet bulb globe temperature.
WBGT community.
That's right.
Which
Sounds
you're
from
both.
Soviet Russia.
You're both
WBGT
proud
plus
members of the
community.
I've never
WBGT.
used the WBGT before.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe you need to just check your privilege
Oh, yeah.
and
That's right.
become a better ally to the wet bulb community.
Yeah, true, actually, especially in urban environments. But anyway, yep.
So WBGT is an entirely different thing. So it's 70% natural wet bulb temperature, 10% air temperature, and 20% black globe temperature. So this is
I'm still.
copper globe.
So it's not black.
Wait.
Sorry.
A copper globe painted matte black.
Oh, sorry.
A copper globe painted matte black with a thermometer stuck into it. And then the tip of the thermometer will sit right at the center of that globe. And that globe is a standardized size. It's 150 millimeters in diameter. And what this does, it takes into account the extra thermal radiation that's in the environment. It's either coming directly from the sun or bouncing from all the surfaces that you're trying. That's why it's a globe, right? So you can get it from all 360 degrees. And then that temperature is another parameter, right? So WBGT is a weighted average of natural wet bulb temperature, black globe temperature, and air temperature.
I didn't realize the weightings in that and how. I'd obviously had heard of the black globe, but yeah.
All of these things are just measures of the environment. They don't really tell us too much about what's happening to the person
No.
in the environment. And that's where we can go down that rabbit hole if you like.
And so having talked us through all the very many variations of wet bulb, how useful are those concepts as a mechanism for understanding heat and humidity and its impacts on people? Okay,
so to varying extents, and I think one of the challenges has been is that we have these rather simple indices that have been developed over time for specific purposes, and then they get applied for different purposes. And I think often people lose sight of the purpose they were initially developed for, and then you end up kind of going, well, wait a minute, why are we doing this again? So WBGT is a good example. So the WBGT was developed in 1957 by the US Army to try to have a heat stress risk management framework for preventing US Army recruits doing their training exercises in the Deep South from dying from heat stroke. And that's what it was developed for, that type of environment, those types of activities. And again, it only measures the environment.
Yeah.
And also what you have are threshold WBGT values that you use to say, okay, when it goes above this, we're going to implement this intervention, or above this threshold, we're going to stop people because the risks are too high.
I mean, it is nice to know that the military-industrial complex does care.
Back in 1957 as well, right?
They've got our interests, best interests at heart.
But now, then we're applying WBGT without properly measuring it as well, in most of the times. And then we're trying to use it to estimate heat stress risk of the elderly during heat waves. It's the
elderly on maneuvers in Alabama.
That's right. So it's a bit problematic. So what we're really advocating is the embracing of these physiological models. So instead of having a model that defines the environment, what you do is that you measure the characteristics of the environment that matter, you measure the characteristics of the person that matter, and then you use this physiological model to integrate that information, and then instead of spitting out kind of a temperature, what it will do, it will provide you with an estimation of how hot the person's going to get, how much work their heart has to do, and we can talk a little bit about why that's important for certain members of the population and how dehydrated they'll become. And then you can use those outputs and compare them against known thresholds that we know are safe or unsafe for different people in the environment, and then come up with some kind of aggregate risk score.
Dare I say that it's more holistic?
It is different. Yes, it is more holistic for sure.
It's interesting though, because for, maybe not for so long, but for a while you had people like myself, the climate scientists over here saying, well, this is how we define extreme heat, mainly by temperature, because that's all our data could really do. Like if we think about the temporal and spatial scales that we work at, temperature was really the only thing we could look at. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got people like Ollie and physiologists who are, very rightly considering what people are wearing, their pre-existing conditions, the immediate environment around them. And it's those spatial scales and temporal scales haven't linked up for a very long time. So I think in part that explains why some thresholds have been taken or some measurements have been taken, and that's become gospel for a while because it seems to be an incremental step to join up.
And even from a public health perspective, what nearly all public health organizations do is that they have simple temperature thresholds that trigger public health responses during heat waves. And they change depending on where you are, right? And that's ascribed to things like acclimatization and things like that.
I've got some opinions.
You've got something pithy to say about this.
It just shits me to tears. There's your pithy line about something over 35 degrees, or over 40 degrees. That
send me home.
Means nothing.
Well, and you know what? Yeah, me too. But 35 degrees in Sydney or Brisbane means a lot different to 35 degrees in London, right?
Yeah, and to be fair, they do have different air temperature triggering thresholds depending on where you are.
True, that is true.
So in the UK, they use, I think it's 27 degrees Celsius with a warm night in between or something like that for 2 consecutive days. Yeah. And then in India, it's above 40 degrees Celsius.
Sure.
So, but irrespective of what those thresholds are, one of the lamentable outcomes of us really being fixated about temperature is that we look at reducing temperature as being the only solution for reducing heat health risk. And this has given rise to the vast uses of things like air conditioning, which is very carbon intensive. So we're kind of stuck inside this vicious cycle whereby it's hot, we adapt by using air conditioning, which uses a lot of electricity, which is generated by fossil fuel power plants, which belch out CO2 into the air, which aggravate global warming, which makes it hotter, which increases the amount of air conditioning we use, and so on and so forth.
We're all a tool of big aircon.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
and
it's a vicious reverse cycle.
Good puns,
Go
right? So we kind of, so we're in this situation where we're kind of this vicious cycle. And, but the problem is that we kind of, we think that the only way to cool people is by reducing the temperature. So if you think about the logistics of it, right? So that building over there, the Charles Perkins Centre on the other side of this old building, the new one, Charles Perkins Centre, it's got a massive atrium. It's 6 floors high, and there's a massive atrium inside. And I remember in 2015 during my first couple of years here in Sydney, I was in the CPC on a 43 degrees Celsius day, and I had to go outside for 5 minutes at lunchtime to warm up. And the reason is because the air conditioning was pumping so fierce. And I just did it. Do you see the thing where I did it? There you go.
You just sit still.
So the air conditioning is pumping so fierce is that it's having to cool not just the air that people are occupying, but the 99.9% of air that people are not occupying. And due to kind of building standards, you're also instructed to keep the air very still, because if you're chilling it and moving it, this means that it becomes drafty and uncomfortable, which is kind of crazy. So anyway, we were kind of locked in these kind of standard ways of doing things. We talked earlier on about clothing as well.
Yeah.
And if you think about the carbon footprint of that, and then multiply by the number of buildings that look like that around the world, it's quite something, right?
It's unnecessary.
It is absolutely unnecessary. So we've been doing some work promoting this idea called a fan-first cooling strategy. So it's a really simple, scalable idea. So if I blow air across the skin, so if we're in this room right now, so the air is very still.
It is very still.
Because that's the way that buildings are built, according to standards that were made in the 70s, I think. And it's probably, 20 degrees Celsius in here, something like that. So if I got a ceiling fan, even though we've got pretty low ceilings here, so maybe that wouldn't be a good idea. But anyway, a pedestal fan, let's say. And I start blowing air across your skin, the air temperature will feel all of a sudden about 4 degrees Celsius cooler. So what this means is that you could actually then allow the temperature inside this room to rise by 4 degrees Celsius. As long as you keep that fan on, you'll feel just as comfortable.
Oh, but the paper will blow everywhere, Ollie, and hair will be in my face.
I remember my PhD supervisor saying about that, this maybe about 10 years ago. So, like there's any paper. I couldn't even find a pen and a pair of scissors the other day. Everything's on computers now, so it's less of an issue.
That's a fair point. But still,
but anyway, I'm sure we found ways around it, right? So,
exactly.
So, and we're not talking about marginal benefits here, right? So what we did is we did this study where we said, okay, what happens if everybody who owns an air conditioner in the whole of Australia adopted a fan-first cooling strategy? This is whereby they would turn on a fan, they'd blow this air across their skin, and they would, at the same time, increase the set point of their air conditioning unit to turn on to start cooling at 26 degrees Celsius instead of 22 degrees Celsius. Now, when I tell people they're going to have their AC running at 26, like, oh my, are you crazy? That's going to be so hot. But you feel just as cool as you do when it's at 22 degrees Celsius because you've got this extra airflow. Because we're cooling you using convection, without reducing the air temperature. And so if everybody did this, it means everybody's air conditioner is going to turn on later in the day. It's going to turn off earlier in the day. It's not going to be working as hard during the middle of the day. And we said, okay, well, how much does that translate into reductions in the cost of air conditioning use? Because we know a lot of people in the community, especially with the cost of living pressures that people are facing, is that you've got a lot of people who own air conditioners, but they don't want to turn them on because they're so worried about how much they're going to cost. So what we said is that, well, if everybody did this, how much would it reduce on average cost of running your air conditioner for a whole year? And we estimate it would reduce it by 70%, 70%. So that's a big cost saving. And in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we did this greenhouse gas abatement cost analysis, basically cost-benefit analysis, comparing how much it would cost to implement this intervention versus how much of a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions we get from the different ways in which electricity is generated around Australia with this fan-first cooling strategy. And what we found is that the benefits were better than the best thing we've done to date, which is when everybody switched their lighting from incandescent lighting to LED lighting. This fan-first cooling strategy, if everybody used it, would be better than that for reducing greenhouse gas emissions relative to the cost of implementing that intervention. So really scalable, really easy, really simple. Everyone could do it tomorrow if they wanted to. We just got to figure out a way of persuading people to do it.
Well, they can through this podcast,
That's right. This
We're
is going to be
a fan-first family.
Are you?
Yep. Triple F.
Very good.
We actually, when we used to live in Sydney,
Triple F.
in northwest Sydney, we were quite shocked to buy a house that didn't have any fans in it. In the end, we didn't put them in ourselves because we moved not long after. But when we built our house, we made sure every bedroom has a ceiling fan in the living room. And it's just like, it's fine. We're fine because we're not in our woolly winter clothing. We're in our summer shorts and T-shirts.
And you've got the air blowing across the skin. It feels cooler. One thing that's really important to keep in mind, though, of course, is that you're not setting the air conditioning unit where it's a heating unit to regulate the temperature at 26 degrees Celsius. All you're doing is setting it to start cooling. So it naturally warms up and then it turns on to maintain 26 degrees Celsius once the air temperature would otherwise go above that.
Exactly. And we don't sleep, admittedly we're in Canberra, it might be different in parts of Sydney these days. We don't need to sleep with the air conditioning on, just a fan and maybe a window open. And it works.
So that's Ollie and Sarah's hot tip. Save the climate
and
save your bank balance.
Yeah, fan first cooling.
It works. It's amazing how many people don't do. I guess I'm,
Well, one of the things that we're looking to do is actually acquire funding to do an implementation study.
Yeah.
Where we try to understand what the best ways of communicating the benefits of this strategy would be to different people, and then try to understand what the barriers to actually adopting this strategy would be, depending on their setting, depending on their priorities, and figuring out different ways in which we can compel people to do this. And there's probably other types of nudges that you can provide, right? Electricity companies could provide nudges to users, because it is also in their interest during very hot days because there's big strain on the grid, right? And so you can relieve that by incentivizing people to say, oh, hey, if you adjust your air conditioner to turn on slightly, but use a fan, you'll feel just as cool and it will save you X amount or something like that.
Like I do get, certainly with the cost of living pressures, people cannot afford to turn on their air conditioning. There's quite a few people who can't do that. There's also another group of people that have their air conditioning on to 18 to 20 degrees in the middle of summer. And I don't quite understand that because you don't it's not needed. Your body doesn't need that to stay cool.
No. And I think, just speaking with some people who are more in the social sciences side of things, there's lots of other kind of cultural considerations, particularly.
Oh, okay, of course.
Within Australia, among different communities, but particularly internationally as well.
Yeah.
So in many developing countries, lower middle income countries, having an air conditioner is often seen as being a status symbol. And so there's those types of things that I'm not in a position to be able to comment too much on, of course.
Yeah.
But those are the type of things I think we've got to understand better and work with in order to try to persuade people to. I think we need to reframe our thinking.
Yeah.
In terms of heat stress, it's not just how hot the environment is how hot you are, and that's what matters from your comfort perspective. From your health perspective, it matters how hot you are.
Curious to know what would be your optimum temperature with an air conditioning on? What temperature would you?
Well, I usually have the air conditioning on on a not on its highest or strongest setting, not on its lowest temperature, and then combine that with a fan. Without knowing this though, but I think that's a cost thing, right?
Give me a quantitative. No.
I would probably want to sit so what I go off actually is the thermostat on my tower fan. Usually it's sitting at around, in the height of summer in Australia, maybe 23, 24 degrees Celsius.
But that's a tower fan though, right?
The fan, so what's happened is if I'm in my living room, I've got quite a small apartment. I've got double glazing, but it's not perfectly sealed because it's a 70s building. Yeah. So if it's a really hot day in the summer, I will close the bedroom doors. Then I've got just the living room and the kitchen. And I will have the air conditioning on and the tower fan going to blow air on me. The air conditioning won't be on very high, and the ambient temperature I'll try and achieve is about 24.
Yeah.
That sounds like,
ish. Yeah. And of course, if I rammed the air conditioning right up, then it could get down to 22 or something.
Yeah.
But even then, it's working pretty hard.
Yeah. But you could probably adjust that a little bit and get the air conditioner to turn on and regulate about 26. And as long as you get that airflow across you'll probably find that you'll be just as comfortable.
And I have ceiling fans in my bedrooms, which I got from the middle aisle of Aldi, which always knows what I need.
It's amazing.
I manifest things in the middle aisle of Aldi,
So it just appears as soon as you need it. Didn't even know you needed it.
That's a really specific one. Like sometimes it's like, I need a new saucepan, I need a new cutlery, but do you want some ceiling fans? Yes, I actually do.
You really do. Yeah. I strongly urge everyone to get ceiling fans or even a pedestal fan, but get them.
But they're pretty cheap. So we had 2 new ceiling fans put into our place. Yeah. Because when we moved in 2019, there were no fans in.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so we got one put in my bedroom, Lottie's bedroom. We haven't got one in the main room yet. But I think they cost like $250 or something like that.
When we bought them, when we built, it was $250 a piece.
And it's probably another $200 to get someone to come in and install it.
I was going to say, you do have to have your ceiling fans installed by a trained professional, an electrician.
Funny that you say that.
What?
The one in one of my children's room, the light fell off not long after we moved in. Thankfully, it wasn't over, like it was one with the light in it. Thankfully, it wasn't over her bed directly, but we kind of turned it on, the light just fell out. I'm like, oh, some trained professional. Maybe it was better.
Dodgy.
Her father did it.
Okay, I'd like to move a little bit on towards heat waves, which is your cup of tea, Sarah, but also Ollie's, I'm sure. So we've mentioned this before on the podcast. Heat waves are Australia's deadliest natural disasters.
They kill more Australians than all other natural hazards combined.
Yep, which is scary. And we've talked about them before as a silent killer.
Yes. There was a study that came out maybe 15 or 20 years ago that coined that term. Was it a report? But yeah.
I got another stat for you.
Yep.
When it comes to heatwave deaths.
I know this one.
You know this?
Okay. All right. Don't steal it.
So latest statistics show that it's estimated that 540,000 people die per year due to extreme heat.
Wow.
Is that global? Yeah, that's global.
That's global.
I was going to say.
So no.
That would be
no.
So
But if you want to contextualize that's the equivalent of a fully loaded jumbo jet crashing every 7 hours throughout the year.
That's more than the population of the ACT.
Sure.
Dying.
Yep. It's scary.
That's not the statistic I was thinking of.
No, okay, yeah.
And, well, we just talked about Australia.
Yeah.
Is that the deadliest natural phenomenon globally? I'm going to say it must be one of the leading causes of death.
Surely, yeah.
Absolutely. And again, it's not a competition, right?
No, we don't want to win this one.
You don't say we're not going to bother with figuring out lung cancer because we haven't figured out heart disease yet, right? I mean, and also I think the big thing that a lot of people potentially miss is that mortality statistic is really the very, very tip of the iceberg that we can see, right? And then below that, which is still visible above the line on our proverbial iceberg, is hospitalizations, strain on the health system, et cetera, et cetera. But then if you think about all of the non-fatal heat-related impacts that lay below the surface of our proverbial iceberg, the heat is going to cost the global economy more than $2.3 trillion a year in lost productivity by the year 2030, which is 5 years away. Right? If you want to contextualize that, that's the equivalent of slashing global GDP growth by 1/3.
I need to remember some of these stats.
It's good stats.
Guess who's writing grants right now?
Right, yes, okay, yeah. No,
very polished. Very polished.
No, but we know that extreme heat impacts people during pregnancy, right? So it increases the risk of preterm birth by 35%. It increases the risk of stillbirth by 40%. We know that heat impacts mental well-being. So it exacerbates violent crime rates. All of these different...
Hot and bothered.
Hot and very bothered. Hot and aggro. Yeah. So there's many different things. And then when we get into the elderly, we know that the elderly, particularly those who live in low resource setting, are much greater risk of perishing or at least having a very rough time during extreme heat events. So there's all of these impacts that when it's wrapped all up, it's pretty frightening. Another thing that is worth thinking about is the way in which extreme heat impacts kids. So I think it was 250 million school kids were sent home at least once last year because of extreme heat from schools.
Right.
So that's one positive for them, isn't it?
Well, for them, maybe not so much their parents.
Yeah, if they can go home to a cool house,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then they've got to get home, right?
Very good point.
So, you can even think about, it's even if they're not sent home, the ability to learn in hot classrooms is obviously greatly compromised. The ability to teach in hot classrooms is probably not optimal as well. So there's all of these different impacts that are happening to different people, which might not show up as being deaths in the competition for who is which cause has the leading impact, even the hospitalization rates. But it's really kind of all these other impacts that they really pay a heavy burden on society.
I think this is like we have mentioned in an earlier episode that the relationship between global temperature rise and heat waves anywhere in the world is very sensitive and very well known.
Yeah.
And you have to move up global temperature a little bit, and you have a large change in the frequency and severity of heat waves. Very clear relationship, and on top of that, I would strongly argue that extreme heat can impact not just everyone but everything as well.
Absolutely,
It's such a symptom of climate change. It's a way of measuring climate change, looking at changes in heat waves, as well as the impacts. And I don't think we currently fully have a grasp of just how wide those impacts are. We can't measure them as well as we need to.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Sarah, because the conversation today is revolved predominantly around health, human health. not even animal health, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
human health.
Yeah.
But it's all, we're all wrapped up in these systems, right?
Yeah.
And so there are going to be secondary and tertiary impacts on human health that still arise due to extreme heat, hot weather,
Absolutely.
affecting other systems
Yeah.
that affect our well-being and health.
Well, again, sorry, I keep on going back to earlier episodes, but the one
Because
where
they're so good.
they're amazing.
Yeah, it's very good.
Everyone
Yeah,
should
it tells a
listen.
narrative. It's very
Yep,
good.
yep. On
Yeah.
point. Going to London when it was 28 degrees Celsius, and I loved it. Like, gorgeous, beautiful day.
Everyone's losing their mind, aren't they?
Well, they were. And
yeah.
then we went down to the tube and I almost fainted because it was so hot.
Yeah, yeah.
in
Which
there.
line were you on?
Can't remember.
Piccadilly?
It definitely did not have
Piccadilly.
Sure.
One of the old ones.
Yeah.
Really old. And it was like
The
at
old
least
deep ones.
20 degrees and everyone is just sitting there. But you can,
In their
that's not
suits.
the weather in their suits.
Yeah.
It's the environment around that making
Still.
those conditions so much
Still,
worse.
it's humid.
Yeah. And even hotel wasn't air conditioned. So,
No. Yeah.
these things that you think that's not too bad, that shouldn't affect us, but it's amplified by
So, the point about air conditioning in places like the UK, so it doesn't have a very kind of widespread
Lack thereof.
use. Yeah, lack
Well,
thereof,
yeah,
right?
what? Yeah.
But then I think it was in The Guardian that I saw an article, maybe it was last year or the year before, where they're talking about the rising temperatures, increased prevalence of hot weather, and the way in which this is going to be coped with is they're going to put a new coal-fired power plant online to supply all the new people who are getting air conditioning.
Fuck off.
Yeah. So I think that's a beautiful example of the maladaptive cycle that we kind of found ourselves in.
I would be all right if it was like renewable energy. Like, yes, air conditioning problems aside that we've just discussed, I would, not be so angry if they were like, okay, well, we're going to, adapt with solar powered air conditioning.
But yes, but then it's also thinking about that. It's interesting that is the first thing that people resort to is air conditioning.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is the point I'm trying to make, right? If we're
yeah.
thinking about how we keep people cool, then what it does, it opens up a lot more sustainable options because then we start thinking about, well, all right, if I start moving the air instead of chilling it, that costs about 1/50th of the electricity to move air rather than chill it. So if we're thinking about sustainable strategies that involve that, because that's a way in which you're not reducing the air temperature, but you're cooling the person by moving the air across their skin, then that's a far more sustainable solution, for example.
And it would be the most, like the perhaps the best but most expensive strategy would be to build houses to a passive house standard, which is where they maintain a stable temperature of around 20 degrees Celsius all year round with no extra internal heating or cooling. But that's very, very like high spec. And so, of course,
what's the carbon footprint of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you're trying to build affordable housing en masse, which Australia and Britain purports to do, it's probably cheaper to build it not great and stick air conditioning in than to, get
if you look at the whole equation.
Yeah, it's really, really tricky. I want to go back to Sarah, your mention of the tube in London. I wanted to ask you both, what's the hottest you've ever been?
Oh, I don't.
You can take a minute to think about this.
This one that really sticks with me is being in Dubai. And I stepped outside when it was like maybe 45 degrees Celsius and like 80 or 90% humidity. I'm like, oh, it's fine. I can walk to my next destination. And I lasted 5 minutes. And I remember thinking as I came out of their rail station, like, oh, that's an enclosed bus stop. Why is that? Why does it have air conditioning? That's probably the most uncomfortable heat-wise I've been.
Middle Eastern desert.
Yeah.
That's pretty good shout. Yep.
So not the London tube.
Bit close.
Yeah.
I can give you probably 2 quick examples.
Okay. Yep.
Is that all right?
Yep. I'll allow it.
Okay.
I was going to say, no, I asked for one.
So I remember being in Greece in 2011 and in Athens, and it was 43 degrees Celsius in the shade, and it was July, and it was sunny. So it was probably like 60 degrees Celsius in the sun. And I remember that being really, really brutal.
In 2018, I was in Russia at the World Cup when I was working there as a journalist. And I got a sleeper train from Volgograd, from Rostov-on-Don to Volgograd. And it was probably a 38 to 40 degree day outside. And when I got on the train, it was like going into the compartment was like when you walk into a steam room or a sauna and you think, you walk in there ready to sweat for 5 minutes. And then you think, actually, no, I'm not really comfortable in here. I should probably leave for my health. It was like that. But there was nowhere to go. It was 14 hours overnight. And I was in this little compartment, second class carriage. So third class might have been better because it was an open carriage, right? This is how Russian
on the roof.
This is how Russian trains work. So third class is open bunk beds, like, a room full of bunks. Second class was what they call in France a cougette, so like 4 bunks. First class, which I got on the way back, was great. It was just 2 beds and But second class was leather couches that became beds. And when the conductress, who probably had been working there since the Soviet Union, came in to check our tickets and give us linen, we gesticulated at the ceiling and, sort of motioned in international sign language, can we put the aircon on? And she just laughed at us and pointed at the open window and was like, there's your aircon, lads. And it was desperate. Like, it was incredibly hot. And I fortunately had like 3 liters of water with me, but I drank it all and was just in extraordinary discomfort.
I find them the most uncomfortable and overwhelming and stressful experience.
Definitely not my bag, that's for sure.
No. Like.
well, okay, so segue.
However.
One of our running themes on the show is that Sarah doesn't like doing field work. Even gets a bit too hot and bothered at conferences in Paris. So I'm so sorry about that. We can talk.
That's my niche. I can comment on that.
But Ollie, you and your team do some very fancy and I think a little bit intimidating research. As you've already disclosed to the listening world that you experiment on people.
We do.
Please tell us about your sick experiments and your lab.
Okay, so the basis of it is that we have a laboratory here called the Thermal Ergonomics Laboratory. And so it's on the top floor of this beautiful building, Susan Wakel Health Building. Housed within the laboratory is a climate chamber. And so in this climate chamber, it's been built to the specifications that I put forward a few years ago, which is a very nice opportunity to get this facility built. And so in it, we can simulate any temperature and humidity combination that we want, which enables us to simulate any heat wave of the past. So we can go into the weather records and we can say, okay, what was the peak temperature? What was the concurrent humidity? We can recreate those conditions right now, expose human participants to those conditions, measure their vital signs really carefully. So we measure how hot they get, how dehydrated they become, how much work their heart has to do. Then it gives us an opportunity to also then systematically assess how good certain low resource cooling strategies might be at reducing those biomarkers of physiological heat stress, so how hot people get, how dehydrated they become, how much work their heart has to do. And we test different strategies in different groups of people. So we just published a paper at the end of last year where we were looking at when fans should and should not be used during heat waves in older individuals, so people as old as 90 years old with heart disease. And we also tested whether wetting the skin makes any difference. If you combine the two, does that make a difference? And does the answer change depending on what type of heat wave it is, whether it's a hot, humid one or a very hot, dry one?
And we'll tell you at the end of the show when it's dangerous to use a fan and when it's not.
Yeah, sure. We can.
But you have to get to the end, okay?
Yeah. So, that's an example of those studies. But we do a lot of work looking at the way in which extreme heat and hot weather impacts human health and well-being across the human lifespan. So we've done work with kids. We just published a paper in British Journal of Sports Medicine, which was the outcome of 4 years of data collection led by James Smallcombe, one of my postdocs, and it was this collaboration with University of Canberra as well. With the data that we collected, we are developing the first ever extreme heat policy for child and youth sport. So this involved us bringing in a range of children of different ages and getting them through their paces in different types of climates that was simulated in the climate chamber. We've just concluded a study that's under review right now, which was funded by the Wellcome Trust, where we simulated a ready-made garment factory in Dhaka, but in the chamber here. And we simulated the type of activities that people do, so the ironing for men, the sewing for women. We even did it so we could measure their work performance and then systematically assess the way in which different scalable and sustainable cooling strategies for cooling them translate into reductions in heat-related distress and also their work performance as well. So that can just give you a bit of a flavor of the type of work that we do.
Yeah, wow.
Probably the other thing I'll quickly mention as well is that we're doing work right now in collaboration with Sarah, trying to understand better the upper temperature and humidity limits for human survival and livability during with climate change due to heat stress. And so we published a paper back in 2023, which proposed a new model for characterizing the limits, heat stress limits for human survival when you take into account the limits of human physiology. And they're quite different to the previous model that was put forward. And so we've just completed the first study. This is led by Jem Cheng, who's a Canadian postdoc who's with me for the last couple of years. And what we've done is we've created 3 different versions of the 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperature condition, which was formerly considered the upper limit for human survival for a 6-hour exposure. We exposed people for 3 hours maximum. And we created 3 different 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperatures with different combinations of temperature and humidity. And based on our model that incorporates physiology, we hypothesized that and the different types of conditions would yield different physiological responses. And what we find is indeed all 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperatures are not created equal when it comes to how hot a person gets and how much work the heart has to do, etc. But those data are just being analysed and written up now for publication.
Great, thank you. I'm just thinking you must have to jump through quite a lot of ethics and risk management processes to get people in there.
But actually, it's a very helpful process. So one of the things I really emphasize to a lot of my team is that the process that the support that the ethics committees give us, it is support. It helps us understand where the risks lie, and it helps us anticipate what we're going to do in the event that something negative happens. And it just makes us more accountable for the work that we're doing. It makes the safety more robust. It makes the science more robust. The other layer of which is what you touched on, is governance as well. So there's governance at the university and there's governance in the building as well. And we need to make sure we're lining all those things up. There was a few teething issues with the moving into the new building here with the establishment of new structures, but we're working through that now. And it is a lot of work, but it's important for us to do it right so we can do these studies safely and to the best of our ability.
I think it's important to note as well that Ollie wouldn't put someone at these upper limit thresholds for 6+ hours.
No.
It is that 3-hour mark.
That's
and
right.
I remember, when
You're saying Ollie's not going to kill anyone in the
not going to
chamber.
kill him, not today.
That's good to know.
Yeah, no,
but then there's that
I mean,
extrapolation.
Not intentionally, no.
Like you'll pull people out before it gets dangerous.
That's right, yeah. So the way in which we manage that risk is that we're measuring everything, right? So we're measuring core temperature, we're measuring blood pressure, we're measuring heart rate, we're measuring hydration status, etc. And we also are measuring perceptual responses as well. And so we have really quite conservative cutoff criteria, which means that we have to stop the experiment as soon as a person's core temperature reaches 39 degrees Celsius, which is that remember before when I was talking about the risk of heat exhaustion, the risk starts to elevate once you reach that core temperature of 39. So what we do is that we make sure we pull people out before they exceed that threshold. And so often what we find is that we're pulling people out and they feel completely fine. But because those are our cutoff thresholds, we have to pull them out. The other thing as well, of course, is that people can withdraw for any reason, any time as well, which is another important kind of feature that all our participants fully understand when they're embarking on these types of studies.
So on that note, how many people do you pull out versus how many people go, no, I can't take this anymore?
Well, it depends. So with GEM's recent study, so that study was pretty labor intensive. With 27 participants, we brought each of them in for 7 consecutive days for heat acclimatization beforehand. And then they undertook 4 separate trials that were spaced by 24 hours apart.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's pretty intense, right? So there's a lot of data collection. And in that, the withdrawals, so we tested these 3 different 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperatures, each made of different combinations of temperature and humidity. So we did 38 degrees Celsius and 81% humidity, 46 degrees Celsius and 46% humidity, and 54 degrees Celsius and 26% humidity. What we found is that more people pulled out at the wet bulb temperature with the higher temperature. And the reason for that is that the limitation to their ability to keep cool and the stress that's on their body is down to their physiological limitations of being able to sweat. So it just induces this extra physiological strain. So we had more people pull out in that environment than we did in the hot, humid environment. But interestingly, when you first walk into those conditions, the warm, humid one feels disgusting when you go in there. But then it just doesn't get any worse. But then the hot, dry one, you get in there, you're like, oh, it's actually quite nice. There's no problem. But then an hour in, you're like, oh, this is not very good. And then 2 hours in, you're like, oh, I'm going to get me out of here.
But anecdotally, like I used to live in Melbourne many years ago, and I remember going for a run one day when it was 38 degrees Celsius. And I was like, oh, this is fine. It's dry heat in Melbourne. It's not like Sydney or let alone Brisbane. And I lasted maybe 20 or 30 minutes because I got worse much more quickly.
That's right,
as opposed to, potentially doing exercise when it's humid and you just go slower to begin with. And
you know what's also worth pointing out is this dissociation that you get, this kind of temporal dissociation between how hot you are and how hot you feel.
Yeah.
And the offset, right? So your sensations, depending on the condition, but often the sensations lag behind the actual physiological strain. And so if you carried on going, by the time that you feel crummy, you're really getting into danger territory. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about people in the real world, right? Because when you're in our trials, we pull you out and then you're in the cool environment. We can cool you down, we rehydrate you, we do all these things. But if you're an old lady in the top floor of an apartment building in a heat wave, socially isolated, don't have family, etc., you're not leaving. And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And so that's kind of That's the thing that kind of keeps it real, you know?
The when Ollie mentioned about, waiting until you feel bad, the damage is already done, triggered a memory in my head. And it must have been January, because I remember that my mum was at the Australian Open. She'd either come down from Brisbane or Sydney. So this would have been like 2011 or 2013, something like that.
2014, was it? That's when they had the real heat impacts.
I think it might have been then, actually, because I was really into golf at that point, and I thought to myself, right, it's going to be really, really hot today. No one's going to be crazy enough to go out there and play golf, so I will, and the course will be empty. So I went to play 9 holes at Sandringham, and I thought, this is great. It's empty. I love an empty golf course. Don't care if it's cold or hot, as long as no one else is there holding me up. And it was when I saw possums that had dropped dead out of the trees that I thought, I probably shouldn't be out here.
Then I noticed that the tree was on fire.
What about on a normal too tricky hot day? What should people do? What's sensible management of the heat?
So I think the first part is understanding what the risk is, right? Because the risk is different, as we've touched on, right? So kind of, I think the first step is understanding actually what your own individual risk is. And so having a means to do that, we've developed this thing called a heat watch tool. It's like it's not an app, it's a tool that you can load on your phone, and it draws on meteorological data, but you also populate it with your age, whether you have air conditioning, whether you have a chronic disease, whether you're on certain types of medication, et cetera, and then it gives you an individualized heat stress risk score. So you can actually go, on a simple to understand scale 1 to 6, and you can, okay. So it's different for different people. So, and that then triggers what you're going to do, right? So your behavior should always be based on what your risk is. That's the first thing I just wanted to, and also plug our heat watch tool.
Heat watch, and that's downloadable from the App Store?
No, it's not an app on the store. So if you just put Heat Watch Sydney into Google, it's the first hit.
Okay.
And it's a web tool, so it's a website at the moment. It's still a prototype, and we're actually applying for funding now to co-design it further with other community groups, and then do an implementation trial to optimize its functionality.
Are you allowed to use it if you live outside Sydney?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we've had users across Australia use it, and we're
down in Melbourne. We'd be like, I mean,
we don't want to help.
I'm just going to wait for Heat Watch in Melbourne to come out. Hopefully, the background is black and it's kind of chic and cool.
Yes, you could use it in Melbourne. We have people in Melbourne use it. So
there you go.
And we're collaborating with people from Monash on the new funding bid to widen its applicability. So then what do you do? So it also depends on what your resources are, right? So, we would never, if you're heat vulnerable and you're genuinely at risk of a negative health impact due to the heat, and you have air conditioning, you can afford to use it, we would never tell people to not use air conditioning. We know it's exceptionally protective. But what we want to think about that, instead of not thinking about that as being the first line of defense for every single person when they're exposed to hot weather. I think that's the kind of key. Yeah, just put on the air conditioning. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what we know is that from a lot of epidemiological studies is that the people who are most at risk during extreme heat events are actually people who don't own air conditioning. They live in low resource environments. They don't have access to cool spaces. So what we need to do is figure out what type of strategies people can use if they don't have a lot to hand. And so a lot of the studies that we've done is looking at how, we're talking about fans earlier on. So should you be using a fan or not? There are reasons that you shouldn't be using it under certain circumstances. We can get into that in a little bit later.
Right at the end.
But also if you've got water, how should you best use water? So everybody always talks about, let's drink water. Right? But you know what? If you drink water, it's actually not going to keep you cooler. It doesn't cool you down drinking water. And so obviously, maintaining hydration is important because it exacerbates the physiological strain that happens inside the body. But if you're already hot and you drink water, it's not going to cool you down.
Does it make it worse?
No, it doesn't make it worse. No. And we always encourage people to remain hydrated. There is a condition called hyponatremia where people drink too much, but you kind of predominantly have to drink a lot in order to get hyponatremia.
How much?
Well, the case study I always use when I'm doing teaching is MDMA. So the party drug that gave rise. So it's prevalent use during the early 2000s among clubbers. That gave rise to quite a few cases.
We were all there.
I
don't know what you're talking about. MD what?
Yeah. It's a rap group, isn't it? There are cases of hyponatremia there.
Anna Wood.
Yeah.
That was famous. Her case was famous. She was famous for the wrong reasons, unfortunately.
Oh, okay, yeah.
She was a teenager. I remember the story vividly, who went out clubbing with her friends, And I believe, she overheated and drank too much water.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, her friends were scared of the ramifications that might happen.
Oh, so they
it
didn't
eventually killed her.
Yeah.
And it was because of what they...
Yeah, so it wouldn't be overheating, though. What it would be is that when you take this drug, this physiological mechanism results in an upregulation of your thirst sensation. So you end up drinking in disproportionate to how much water that you need.
Yeah.
And so this case study that I always talk about in my teaching, I think the example was the person drank 11 liters of water in a space for a couple of hours.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it basically dilutes your ion concentration, so you can't, your action potential is all thrown off, and then therefore your neural conductivity of various processes are disrupted, and you end up dying. So
is that physically possible? Like, I can't imagine.
Literally, yeah.
I guess.
When well, I mean, I'm sorry, Mum and Dad, if you're listening, but when you're that cooked, like, you don't know.
You're totally
don't know. Well, sometimes you don't know what you're doing.
On brand, well done.
Yeah. You're gonna, because you have a distorted perception of.
I know. I just...
How many times you've been to the bar and got a glass of water?
Yeah, I just 11 litres in 2 to 3 hours. Like, that's enormous.
It's a fair, you're smashing it at that point.
Yeah, like you're never not drinking.
But back to the question, what you do with water. So applying water to the skin surface is a really simple, easy, effective strategy that people can use. Often people don't think about it. So you think about why you sweat. You're sweating to get water, effectively body water, on the skin surface so it evaporates and cools you down. But if you can take water and actually apply it to the skin surface and then it evaporates, then you don't have to sweat. So we're doing a study right now, which is it's a pretty nice one. So I would like to explain it. So if you think about areas of the world that don't have a lot of water that's available to drink, there's water around, but a large proportion of it is grey water, so it's not fit for human consumption. But it can be relatively easily treated in order to make it safe enough to put on the skin. So you can take this water that you can't drink, you treat it, you place it on the skin, and you're effectively hydrating with water without drinking it. Because what it's doing is it's evaporating, it's doing what sweat would do, so you don't have to sweat, and therefore you preserve your body water. So that's an example of where this type of strategy might be relevant. And we also know it's very effective at keeping in check the cardiovascular strain that occurs when people are exposed to the heat. One thing we didn't touch on, we talked about heat exhaustion and heat stroke, but only about 20-25% of cases during extreme heat, hospitalization or death cases in extreme heat, are actually due to heat stroke. You see a large proportion of people getting hospitalized or dying due to cardiovascular issues, so heart attacks or kidney failure. And the reason for that is they're not getting heat stroke. They're not even getting heat exhaustion. What's happening is that they're getting hot. They're having this redistribution of blood from the body core towards the skin surface. You've only got so much blood inside the body. And if you didn't increase your heart rate, you'd have a drop in blood pressure. So your body automatically starts making your heart beat faster. And if you've got an underlying cardiovascular infirmity, you have a cardiovascular event. It's like running for a bus with a dodgy hammy when, except the circumstances are far more severe. And likewise, kidney disease. If you've got kidney disease and then you have a reduction in blood flow or oxygen secondary to reduction in blood flow, because it reduces you in the blood, it then places you at greater risk. It's not because they've got heat stroke, but it's the way in which their body are responding to the heat in order to keep them cool.
And it exacerbates underlying conditions.
Can I interject there? On that note, I knew that more people die from underlying conditions.
Was it very hot when you were going down the stairs recently? Is that what's going on there?
Do I have to tell this story now? No.
It was a little Easter egg for the future.
I fell down the stairs at home. No, sorry, I had a fall.
You had a fall.
Fall down the stairs. But it wasn't hot. It was cold that day. And I wasn't even drunk. It was nothing. Like, there was no kids around. I just stumbled and hurt myself. But anyway, that was not a dodgy. That was a dodgy mind. Something that I've been curious about is when people present at hospital during extreme heat, how would you tell that someone's got heat stroke versus an underlying medical condition? Because, we've talked about heat being the silent killer.
Yep.
We underestimate or underreport deaths. No fault to our own. It's hard to see. Like, are there any markers in that? And I guess a follow-up question to that is, can we, easily detect and measure and record heat stroke deaths, or is it just falling into the ether?
Yeah. Well, so I'm not a clinician, so I can't give direct answers to this, but we work with clinicians who do this type of work. In fact, we've got a small collaborative project with a researcher from the Burnett Institute, which is kind of exactly looking at this question.
Okay.
Why would we want to know this information? So first of all, properly characterizing heat-related impacts is pretty important. So we understand that it's a problem, so something needs to be done about it. And so what we are pretty confident right now is that we're vastly underestimating heat-related health impacts, particularly based on, they're called IC10 codes.
Yes.
So this is where somebody comes in and they choose a code off a computer system which characterize the cause of either death or hospitalization or whatever it might be. In most cases, my understanding is, not being one of these people, is that if you were to identify it as being, let's say, heat stroke, then you'd probably have some kind of verification that they had hypothermia. So they'd have a very high core temperature, potentially by measuring that core temperature. But as I mentioned, if somebody came in and it was a heat-related incident because it was cardiovascular disease, they probably wouldn't present with a very high core temperature. In fact, they might have a relatively modest core temperature because it wasn't the core temperature that's driving that response. What we're trying to work on right now is coming up with some kind of educational piece that helps people understand better what these different types of heat-related cases look like. Yeah. So the reason that kind of, what gave rise to that kind of idea in the first place is I gave a talk at the Coroner's Conference for Australia 2 or 3 years ago.
I hope you had some killer material.
Yay. It was deadly. And so I gave this talk where I went through the 3 different main ways in which you can die due to the heat. And quite a few of the very esteemed coroners that were in the room, quite a few of them kind of put their hand up and go, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
and actually, and even when I described I remember one person in particular, when I described the pathway of what heat stroke actually is, I do see quite a lot of sepsis cases on hot days.
Wow.
And then he's like, they might be quite linked actually. And so that type of...
Because that's the thing, it's sepsis, right? Like it presents as sepsis, not necessarily heat stroke. Therefore, we're not catching.
Maybe not. So that's from the characterization perspective to understand the scale of what we're dealing with and justifying the resources that need to be directed to try to solve this problem. We've got to count the problem properly in the first place. And then the second thing is that, and this is maybe a secondary benefit, is that it may change the treatment pathway. It may not in most cases, but it may change the treatment pathway in an emergency setting, whereby, for example, if somebody was hospitalized and they've got heart disease and, if it's not heat stroke, then you don't want to focus on lowering their core temperature, for example. But maybe, that's not necessarily the case. So that's kind of where we're at with that. I'm just trying to think what the question was now.
Can't remember.
Just rambling on.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about making sure that I don't get poo in my bloodstream next summer. We're going to do the quiz. This is the first quiz. Right. This is the first quiz we've ever done. You don't have the answers, haha.
I know, that's like...
Just as well, I don't either.
You better have
So what I want us to do is we're going to finish each episode from now on with a quiz.
Oh.
Right? What
do we win?
Whoever wins gets to choose the weather-related song that we'll play the episode out with.
Okay.
Any song you like, as long as it's about the weather.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think I know any.
There's so many.
No,
there are actually a lot. I did mean to get ChatGPT to give me a list of all weather-related songs. Right. We can still do that afterwards if you want. But okay.
All right. Don't focus on that. Get the questions right first.
So, question 1: which part of Australia holds the record for the highest temperature ever recorded? A. Marble Bar, WA. B. Oodnadatta, South Australia. C. Birdsville, Queensland.
A.
A. Marble Bar, B. Oodnadatta. The correct answer is B. Oodnadatta. So well done for sticking with it. Where it was 50.7 degrees in 1960.
That's right, yes.
Equal to Onslow, WA in 2022.
Yes, I had temporarily forgotten that, yes.
Okay, it's 1-0 to Sarah. We're not cheating. She hasn't got the answers.
I don't have the answers. It's blank. It's got
whatever.
Yep.
You got it written on the back of your hand, have you?
Yes, that's it. The hottest temperatures ever recorded.
Take it really seriously, getting tattooed wrong.
Wow.
Well, they are suns, so
Question 2. Where was the highest air temperature ever reliably recorded on Earth taken? A. Death Valley, California. B. Mitrabar, Kuwait. C. Kabylie, Tunisia.
I'm going to go A.
I want to say A.
It makes sense.
That's what I was going to say. But Kuwait gets pretty toasty as well.
But reliably. Anyway, sorry, I'm not going to influence.
There was a place in Iraq as well. No, Iran. That was, but that's not one of the.
It's just
not that.
I'm thinking about recording equipment. I guess
So-
I know more about.
So I'm
Yeah.
one down.
And
so
Sarah
I have
has
to go
already
with a
said
different one if I want to claw that back. So the other two were Tunisia or...
But you also want to get on the board.
Yeah.
Do you know, even before you gave the answers, I thought Death Valley, so I'm going to go with Death Valley.
Death Valley.
The answer is A, Death Valley.
There you go.
Death Valley, California.
54.2?
56.7.
Oh, wow.
No
Whoa.
bonus points for guessing the
Okay,
correct
yeah, yeah.
temperature. That was in
Shouting out numbers
1913.
now, aren't
Although
Yeah,
50,
that's the Dust Bowl drought.
54.4
Oh.
in 2020 and 2021, it's considered more reliable by many experts.
There
There
you
was
go.
And that was the Dust Bowl drought around the time of the Dust Bowl drought.
Would have?
which
Oh,
is-
yeah, maybe.
I
Maybe.
think so, yeah. Anyway.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's 2-1. 2-1. Sarah
On the board,
has
that's
1 point lead, but Ollie's on the board.
Yeah.
Number 3. You might have a chance to get back in here.
Yeah, I think we're done with the climate ones now. Yep.
The hottest temperature ever recorded at a men's FIFA World Cup match
I'm out.
was 42 degrees Celsius. When did this occur? A, USA 94, B, Qatar 2022, or C, Mexico 1986?
What time of year was it in Qatar?
That's a very good question.
No, I'm not
Can we give a qualifying?
No.
I think it's such a smart question that I have to answer that. It was in December, December was Qatar 2022.
And the reason they moved it is because otherwise they would have had temperatures like that.
When they bid to win
Alright.
it, they said they would temperature
Cool.
control all the stadiums,
Yeah, yeah.
but they didn't, and they just moved it.
So what were the other two options?
Qatar was a trick question. I'm glad you saw
Yeah,
through
yeah,
it.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
very smart.
I know. I'm going to go Mexico.
Ollie
So I guess it depends where they played in the US.
sure
So
does.
if they
Yes,
played
that's
in like Dallas or if they played in Phoenix or something like that, then 42. Where else would be 42? I can say the US.
The answer is A, USA.
Yes.
Soaring back.
That was in Dallas.
Yeah, there you go.
At the Cotton Bowl, it was Republic of Ireland versus Mexico.
That's right, yeah,
42
yeah, yeah.
degrees. Hottest conditions ever recorded at a men's World Cup.
Did Mexico win?
I don't remember what that. Probably a draw,
no,
wasn't it?
I think Ireland won that.
Wow.
One. Yeah.
So it's 2-2.
Yep. Wait,
Two
no.
questions to go.
Yeah, 2-2. Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, 2-2.
We've only had 3 questions though.
Yeah, so Sarah got one wrong and I've got
that's
one
right.
wrong.
Oh, yes. No, you're right. Yeah, sorry. Yep,
That's right.
Can't count.
This is funny because we were talking about this on the Uber here, actually.
Okay.
A little bit. We're talking about a little bit.
Yeah.
Which Australian music festival was cancelled in 2019 due to the risk of extreme heat and fire? A, Splendour in the Grass. B, Falls Festival. C, Big Day Out.
I'm going to go Falls. Yes, Falls.
Uh,
Not Falls.
Splendid Grass.
The answer is B, Falls Festival, and it was in Lawn.
Lawn. Yep. 2019.
I could have tricked you again because
Black
it
Summer.
used to be in Lawn and Tassie.
Okay.
At the same time.
It was the time of year that it is and the year that it was in.
Question 5. So Sarah has a 3-2 lead. If you win this one or draw it, then you've won.
Okay.
You need to lose it, and Ollie needs to win it
All right.
to draw level and go to a tiebreaker.
Don't know a lot about Russia, so this.
The Siberian region of Verkhoyansk in the Arctic Circle has seen recorded temperatures as low as 67.8 degrees Celsius. But what is the highest temperature ever recorded there?
38.4.
A, 35,
I don't know.
B, 38, C, 41.
What's its latitude?
I don't have its latitude to hand, I'm afraid. I can find out if you really want to, but I think that might be a bit specific.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
We are
And also
scientists
Ryan's
after
got the
all.
room booking.
Yeah, 7 minutes.
Probably one of those things where you're tempted to think that, I don't know, like, what did I say, 41 was the highest?
My
you said?
options were, so the lowest is negative 67.8.
Yeah.
What is the highest temperature there?
I'm going B.
I think the minus 67, that's the telling us, obviously that's,
That's true.
yeah, it's true. And it's not obviously not a red herring because that's why it's true, but I'm going 41.
Okay. Brrr, drum roll. The answer is B38.
Ah!
Congratulations. We fixed it.
Yeah.
It happened. I can't remember I don't know, one of the warmest years on record previous.
Yeah.
And it was a temperature difference of a roughly 100 degrees. I remember thinking that.
Do you know when I moved here? So I moved here, I used to live in Ottawa in Canada. And when I got when I arrived at the airport to move to Australia, it was, I think, minus 25 degrees Celsius. I had this big coat. I took it off and I put it in the bin when I was in the departure lounge.
See you never.
See you later. Yeah, exactly. And the next day, I sorry, it was minus 24. And then I started work on the 2nd of January, so 2 days later. and it was 35 degrees Celsius here. So it was a 59 degrees Celsius swing.
that
Well,
would
this
hurt.
swing here, maybe this one was right up your alley, Sarah,
Yeah.
because it was June 2020.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is WMO, highest ever
Yeah.
recorded
Yeah.
a temperature north of the Arctic
You probably
Circle.
got like a ping alert on some app you've got on your phone, didn't you?
Probably.
and, that,
Special interest.
and that means the difference between the lowest and the highest is
Yeah,
105 degrees.
I remember, yeah.
That's
yeah,
incredible.
It's a
yeah.
huge
Yeah,
swing,
yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
Yeah, I know.
It's a
Yeah,
huge
it's
swing.
massive.
And so you now need to think of which weather-related song you want to play the episode out with while Ollie tells everyone when to use your fan and when to not use your fan.
Okay, well, there's a complicated answer and then a simplified answer. The
Okay.
complicated answer is it depends on humidity.
It always depends.
Yeah. So the temperature at which a fan becomes detrimental rather than beneficial is dependent on how much extra heat you're adding to the body versus how much extra evaporation you get because of humidity.
Mhm.
So it changes between, say, 38 degrees Celsius and 42, 43 degrees Celsius, depending on the humidity. But that's not very helpful for public health messaging. So we've come up with simplified temperature thresholds, and it's depending on who you are. So you probably shouldn't be using a fan above 37 degrees Celsius if you're very elderly and there's other reasons that you think that your sweating might be impaired because you're on different types of medication. For the elderly, we say 38 degrees Celsius, and for young, healthy people, 39 to 40 degrees Celsius. So if you use a fan below those, you're completely fine. It's probably going to give you benefits.
And is that the outside temperature if you're sitting at home? Or?
It's the temperature that you're exposed to.
Right.
So the limitation, of course, is that a lot of this messaging is based on what it is outside. So how that translates to the indoor environment. Obviously, if the people that we're thinking of, people don't have air conditioning.
But it's good to have a thermostat at home then to know.
It helps if you've got some kind of, even just a simple thermometer in the room, yeah.
Yep, great. Okay, thank you. And that's given Sarah enough time to check.
There's so many to
Zach's,
choose
have you chosen one in that time or not?
I have chosen about 10, so I need to win
But you've
10
got
more
to pick
quizzes.
one.
Yeah, I'm going to go with The Sun is Shining by Bob Marley.
Oh, nice. Great
Yeah,
choice.
I almost went a Frozen option for my
That would have been good.
daughter, but no.
Okay, and now we need to go and check whether we can legally do that. You know,
That's right.
what's
You lured me in.
Ollie, thank you very much for
Yes.
joining us today.
Absolute pleasure.
It's been
Thank
a
you
real
for
treat.
taking the time.
Been a very hot episode full of hot people, and I hope all the hot people at home enjoy listening to it.
Yes,
Thank you.
it's been a wild ride. We're heading off now to turn the aircon and fan on, dampen a towel, and take a cold shower.
We've got heaps more exciting and important episodes on the horizon, including a very special chat with Australia's favourite science expert.
So please join us for the next episode of Totally Cooked.
And we'll tackle the climate crisis together.
Hello, dear listener. It's Ian in the Edit Suite. Producer Zach and I Googled stuff about copyright, and we can't play famous songs on the podcast without getting sued for infringement. So it's a hollow quiz victory for Sarah. Never fear, the weather and climate quizzes will return sometime next year with a less legally dubious prize for the winner.